Hi everybody, and welcome to Big Joe's Journal. My name is Joe Tilden and I am the host of this program. Well, we're taping this on the first day of fall 2019, and summer is now history. And so we move into the fall season. We look forward to foliage and all the rest of it, and we try not to think too hard about what is going to follow. But another big thing that starts right now is the political process, which will culminate in the election of November 2020. For example, it's all on the local level right now. A number of your towns and your communities are getting together, and they're organizing their local committees, which means you'll have a chair and a vice chair, and of course, that all-important position of treasurer. And as the local committees organize, within a couple of weeks, your county committees will come together and will organize. And of course, from your county committees, you'll pick delegates to your state committee. And state committees, this will go on September, October, into November. And it's very, very important that your party's organized and they have a good, strong organization behind them. Because a candidate cannot do the job by themselves. They need a lot of support. You need financial support, which means you have to have people that know how to raise money and people that are going to be willing to contribute to your campaign. And you need a lot of PR, and you need help here, there, and everywhere. When the actual campaign gets underway, your political parties are going to be setting up their local headquarters that have to be staffed. And this all leads up, first of all, to the state conventions that will be held next spring. And the state conventions will pick delegates to go to the national convention. In the case of the Democrats, the national convention this year, or next year rather, will be held in Milwaukee. And supposedly, the purpose of the convention is to pick your ticket. But over the last few years, conventions have lost a lot of their clout. Back in 1948, when they started telecasting national conventions on TV, your networks carried the entire convention. Began in 1948, when both parties met in Philadelphia, and 1952 in Chicago. In 56, they were back in Chicago again. And 1960 was the first time that they held conventions in different cities. The Republicans stayed in Chicago, the Democrats went out to Los Angeles. And then in 64, the Democrats were in Atlantic City, and the Republicans, I do believe, were in San Francisco. Yep, they were, San Francisco. And it's been a long time since they both met, in the same city. The reason they met in the same city earlier was for the convenience of the TV networks. Once they set up with all their equipment and everything that they needed back in those days, it was easier to have the Republicans meet and then a week off and then the Democrats meet. But I think those days are long gone. This year, I'm not sure where the Republicans are having their national convention, but I know the Democrats are going to be meeting in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. 4 years ago, as you know, the Republicans met in Cleveland, and that was the convention that crowned Donald Trump as the Republican nominee. There are a number of Republican bigwigs that stayed away from that convention, including the governor of Ohio. Normally the governor comes to welcome the delegates and all that sort of thing, but the governor of Ohio, he despised Mr. Trump, and he refused to attend the Republican National Convention. It did former President Bush. Both President Bushes stayed home in Houston rather than attend the Republican National Convention. And the Democrats, of course, met in Philadelphia. and went through the formality of nominating Hillary Clinton. Well, the process begins this week at your local level. You need at least 3 people, although I understand in some cases you probably get by with 2. But you got to have a chair and you got to have a treasurer. And then, of course, once you get your committees organized, the next big thing is selecting candidates. And sometimes, at least at the local level here in Vermont, sometimes they'll wait to the last minute and then have to go scrounging around for candidates. Last election, the local Democratic Party, they were very, very fortunate that Cheryl Hooker agreed to go on the ticket. And I think Cheryl was as surprised as anyone when she came in second and is back serving her second term in the Vermont State Senate. The Democrats, desperately looking for candidates, they persuaded Mr. Cox, who's the head of the Farmer Food Co-op, who was going to run as an independent, to instead eliminate the I and run as a D, run as a Democrat. And a gentleman from Mount Holly was the third member on that team. And having run twice for the state Senate, you know, campaigning is almost a full-time job. You have to do your fundraising. You have to get out your signs, your newspaper advertising, your advertising on radio, and of course, through the efforts of PEGTV, being present on television and more or less getting your viewpoints out to the people and let them decide whether they want you to be their representative or they want somebody else. Here in Vermont, I think we're more inclined to vote for the person than with a party. And of course, right now, as you know, the Democrats have an overwhelming majority in the legislature. It's veto-proof. And I think it's probably the first time in centuries that the Democrats have had that much control of the legislature so as to make it veto-proof. They have the ability to override any veto that Governor Scott should issue. For a number of years, of course, the Republicans dominated politics in Vermont, and they had a Republican governor. And you might have said then at that time that the Republican legislature was veto-proof, but because you had a governor in the governor's office, the legislature pretty much approved just about everything the governor sent down. But you know, after a period of time, prosperity brings division. And that's what happened to the Republican Party in 1962 when a group of prominent Republicans, including many here in Rutland, weren't happy with the Republican governor at that time. That was F. Ray Keyser Jr. And they more or less split from the Republican Party and set up an independent party for Hoff. And it's the result of that split in the Republican Party in '62 that Vermont elected a Democratic governor. In that election, the Republicans still control the legislature, but again, because of the split in the Republicans in the legislature, Tim O'Connor of Brattleboro, who was a Democrat, was elected Speaker. And it's probably one of the first times you've had a Republican-controlled House with a Democratic Speaker. When Hoff was elected, of course, his lieutenant governor was Republican, Ralph Foote. And Lieutenant Governor Foote was from Middlebury. And he ran against Hoff in '64 and of course, lost. Jack Daly became our lieutenant governor. So for the first time since way back in the early 1850s, Vermont at that time had a Democratic governor and lieutenant governor, and you still had a Republican-controlled legislature. And it wasn't until the 70s that the growth of the Democratic Party, that they gradually gained control of the legislature. It went back to the Republicans around the year 2000. And the reason for that was that Governor Dean signed the Civil Unions Bill, which was the first step to legalizing same-sex marriage, although at that time the folks pushing for civil unions denied it. Said, no, we're not going after marriage, we just want this. Well, of course, that was a lie. And they did push and finally eventually got legalization of same-sex marriage. Well, the spirit in Vermont, there's a big movement called Take Back Vermont. And the Republicans regained control of the legislature. And they would maintain it for, I'd say, about 2 terms. And then the Democrats would regain control, and the last election, they overwhelmingly dominate the legislature, along with their allies, the progressives. But you can gradually see how prosperity begins to tear things apart. And you can see that in the last primary 2 years ago when you looked at the 4 people seeking the Democratic nomination for governor. It was a joke. It was an absolute joke. One of the candidates was a 14-year-old kid from Bristol. And all the more power to him. Hopefully he'll maintain that interest in politics and the desire to be a candidate. And when he gets a little older, will run, say, maybe for his local select board or school board, and then work his way up through the legislature. The thing that we need to get younger people more involved. And I think that is happening. If any good comes out of the current administration, it's the fact that they were so terrible that they were able to unite the country against them. And they were able to get the young people involved. But you can demonstrate from now till hell freezes over. But you're not going to make a change in government if you don't vote. And so the important thing is that while you're demonstrating, try registering voters and persuade them that the only way you're going to make a change, the only way you're going to save the country, make the country better, is for people to vote come November 2020. And so all political parties begin their reorganization, begin it this week with your local caucuses. If you have any desire to be involved in local politics in any way, go to the caucus of your choice. Now here in Vermont, I regard myself as a conservative Democrat, and I've never toed the party line, and that was a big reason why the 2 runs for the state senate I was not elected. Because I've sort of gone a middle-of-the-road conservative thing. I've never regarded Republican opponents as the enemy. I've always thought of them as colleagues, thought of my Democratic running mates. And we're all working for the same thing, for the betterment of the citizens of the state of Vermont, is the way I looked at it. And regardless of who was elected, it would be a positive element. The state government would move ahead. I think when I was running, my teammates were very, very qualified people, but so were the folks that the Republicans nominated, extremely well qualified. So at least that was my view and still is my view. But 2 years ago, the Democratic Party started, despite the huge majority, started showing that there were splits coming. And you can see that in the people that were running for governor. Of the 4 running, none were qualified for the office. And Governor Scott actually had a cakewalk in being elected. In his own party, he had a primary, but the gentleman that was opposing him was dumber than a box of rocks. When they had their TV discussion, I mean, every item that came up, his opponent was going to turn it over to a study committee. Everything was going to be done with a study committee. but he made no positive statements about what he was going to do about this, that, or the other thing. And it was a cakewalk for the governor to be renominated and to be reelected. Now, whether that's going to happen in 2020, I don't know. But I think it shows a sign of the majority party now starting to come apart. When you can't get a qualified candidate to seek the office of governor, it's a sign that your party's in big trouble. And while we had 4 people seeking the nomination, none of them were qualified, including the eventual nominee. I mean, his or her problem was he couldn't make up his mind whether he was a man or a woman. Well, everybody's saying, hey, it's the first transgender candidate and so forth. Well, you know, the idea is policy. Can you govern and can you lead? That's what counts. And I think the Democratic Party in 2020, we get organized now, get started now. Once you get all your committees organized and get the machinery functioning, the next big step is to look for qualified candidates and see who is willing to run. So that process, of course, begins this week. Well, another big topic of discussion is the weather. We look at our friends down in Texas, in Houston, Galveston, Beaumont, Texas. For the second time in, 3 or 4 years, they've been hit with a massive catastrophe. Folks are abandoning their homes again, which are being flooded. They were promised last time when Harvey came in that this is a once in 50 years, once in 100 years storm. And here they are hit again. Many folks just finished repairing their homes. Move back in, they got to do the same thing all over again. The area has been hit hard. And, you know, you just look at it and it really breaks your heart. See, these folks, they're carrying their kids, they're wading through water, which is waist deep. Another area of catastrophe, of course, will be Bermuda. Hurricane that came up the coast and made a sharp right turn. It's going to hammer Bermuda again. I mean, they haven't recovered from the last one. They're going to be smacked with another one. You know, there are people that object to living up here in the hills of Vermont. They say, oh, your winters are cold. The cost of living is high. That's very true. Because many of the goods that we have to be shipped in. Of course, that costs money. And it does cost a lot to live here. We're a small state. In many ways, I don't think we spend within our budget. And it's an expensive state to live in. Our population is pretty static. We lose people, we bring people in. So it pretty well balances off. We're about 620,000 right now, 625,000, right about there. But all in all, when you look at the way Mother Nature is hammering other parts of the country, we're not really that bad. The report is that we're going to have a tough winter. It's going to be bitter cold, so they're saying. And you know, you kind of look at it and say, well, where's global warming? We're going to have a bitter cold winter. You know, global warming was supposed to eliminate all that. It's going to cause problems of its own, no question about that. The fires in the Amazon are going to have a very, very severe effect on weather the world over. And I think this idea of climate change, which has been poo-pooed by the ignoramuses that make up the current administration in Washington, what it has done is brought people together to demonstrate. All you have to do is look at the number of young people, not only young people, but also adults, that took part in the demonstrations last week to try to wake the country up to what is happening with our climate change. I know I have a niece and a nephew-in-law that live up in Fairbanks, Alaska. And they've had temperatures in the 60s and 70s up there, which is extremely unusual for that part of the world. The result is that a lot of the permafrost is melting and things are changing. You look at Greenland, where some of these big icebergs in Greenland are breaking off. And the same way in Antarctica. As the globe gets warmer and warmer. But you know, if you look at the overall picture, this is a pattern which takes place over thousands of years. Years ago, we had the Ice Age. Everything was frozen over. And our scientists are telling us that much of the geographic shape of our land was established by the glaciers that covered this entire territory. Up in Grand Isle, Vermont, there are examples of creatures that now we only find in the oceans that at one time were occupying the area up around Lake Champlain in that area. So over thousands and thousands of years, things change. At one time, of course, we know we had the dinosaurs and some of those rather large, dangerous creatures, and I thank God we don't have them now. But could we be going through a period like that? Not this generation, but future generations, thousands of years down the road, they be going through that again? Very strong possibility. Very, very strong possibility. So, times change. Nothing remains the same. You know, I look back past few years, and you can see how things have changed. There's a program on our sister channel, Channel 15, done by Ray Mooney, with the help of the Rutland Historical Society. And it talks about Rutland back in the 40s and 50s. And I watched that program, and it brings back an awful lot of memories. And you can see how Rutland has changed. I know the last one on, he mentioned the root beer stand, the A&W root beer stand up on North Main Street. A lot of people remember that. You know, when that first opened, the waitresses used to be on roller skates. And cars would pull in the parking lot. They had like a canopy, and you pull up there, and a girl would come over on a roller skate, and you place your order. Pretty soon come back, can of root beer and a hamburger or hot dog or whatever you wanted. There was another A&W root stand over on Route 4 in Center Rutland. Right now the building is still there. Of course, it hasn't been used in years. The Reardon family in Rutland ran that A&W over there. And it's next to the Sunoco gas station, which is on Route 4. And, well, actually it's in West Rutland. And the old building, now I think there's a chain link fence around it. Somebody used that area to store their boats there at one time, and I think they put up a chain link fence. But that A&W is still there. Well, of course, the A&Ws, you know, were only open when the weather was good. Sort of like the village snack bar from spring until late fall. And after a while, at least here in Rutland, I think one of the waitresses had a fall and hurt herself, and they did away with the roller skate bit. But you know, roller skating back in those days used to be a very popular pastime. Down where Dunkin' Donut and Bolorama is now, at one time that was all of the Buffum farm. And they had a huge cow barn. And that cow barn was redone when the farm had closed and everything. And it was called Meadowbrook Arena. And they put in a very, very smooth floor, you know, like a huge, like you'd see in a basketball court. And that was a roller skating rink. And it used to be very, very popular. You know, if you wanted to make a hit with your lady friend, took her roller skating. You roller skate around the rink holding hands. many, many years ago. Well, of course, now that area is all built up. Meadowbrook was also used for social events in the city. We used to have a winter carnival in February. And the carnival ran 3 days. It always opened on Thursday night. Killington was not open at that time, but Pico was. And they used to have a torchlight parade. Skiers would start at the top of Pico. You have a torchlight parade, skiers coming down Pico. And that was the opening of the winter carnival. And the final event of the carnival, and I believe it was on a Saturday night, seems about right. They'd have a big, if you will, a semi-formal dance down at Meadowbrook, and they would crown the carnival queen. And one year, that carnival queen was Carleen Johnson. She's a very beautiful young lady, blonde. And she had competed as Miss Vermont in the Miss America contest, and hadn't done, well, she did well, but, you know, she wasn't Miss America. So she entered again in another contest called the Miss Universe contest. And she was more successful in that one. And she went on to be Miss USA in the Miss Universe contest, and she came in second or third in that, I think. But over time, the events moved up to the Rutland Armory. Meadowbrook was torn down. Bolorama was built, and then later A&W, and of course now you have White Playground down at the end of what was cow pasture originally. And the carnival and the formal dance moved up to the Armory. And it was only held there once because whatever happened that night, the Armory caught fire. And much of it, the interior, especially the basketball area, was pretty well damaged and destroyed. Well, those of you that are old-timers can remember, you used to have the high school basketball tournaments at the Armory, the Southern Vermont tournaments. Your schools were divided as A, B, and C. And it was also MSJ's home basketball court. Well, with the Armory out of use, the Southern Vermont tournament moved to Springfield. Springfield had just built new junior high, and they had a new beautiful gymnasium. So the tournament moved to Springfield, and it would never return to Rutland. Well, MSJ, through the good offices of Rutland High School, MSJ was able to use the Rutland High home court as their home court. And that home court was a gymnasium that's now in the middle school. And of course, nowhere was it ever able, to bring in the people that you could get in the Armory. The Rutland MSJ games always used to be played at the Armory because the place was packed. But also the gymnasium, was first come, first served. Once it was filled up, the doors were closed. The Armory would never really come back as a large basketball court. And the headmasters began changing the formula and all the rest of it. But the Southern Vermont tournament, which used to be a big deal in Rutland, the first weekend in March, once the Armory caught fire, it was no longer available, and it left Rutland. That was the end of it. So, just kind of reminiscing a little bit and watching Ray Mooney's reminiscences of Rutland in the old days, it brings back memories. See the old railroad yard? Now we've got just a few tracks through there and Walmart's down there. I know the younger generation finds it kind of hard to believe that one time we had 27 to 30 trains a day coming in and out of Rutland. They had passenger trains going to Boston, to New York, to Montreal. The one going to Boston went down through Bellas Falls. That was the Green Mountain Flyer, they called it. The one going to Montreal, they call the Whippet. And I cannot remember the name of the train that went down to New York. Actually, it went as far as Albany. And then in Albany, a Central Vermont engine would hook on and haul the train into New York. Same thing the train going to Boston. You go down to Bellas Falls, and there the Rutland locomotive would deconnect and be replaced by a Boston and Maine locomotive that would haul the train the rest of the way into Boston. And I remember that especially because I rode that train many times, going down to Boston to see the Braves, who were in Boston at the time, the Boston Braves, the Red Sox. So much for memories. Enjoy the fall. May Almighty God in His infinite wisdom continue to bless these United States of America. God love you. We'll see you all next week.